Bum, bum, bum. There you go. Carry on.
Are we at war with Russia, Joe?
Who, you and me? No.
Well, that's
I don't think you're ready.
no.
No, I don't think you've been doing the preps. You were just talking about your shirt being a bit too
Come on,
small for you. Like, you know.
don't embarrass me in front of everyone. We just got through Christmas.
I don't know if you're combat ready, Neil.
But how does the shirt's too short on the arms? But that's not the poncho's fault. That means you're shrunk in the wash.
Right, okay. Right. That's your get out clause. All right. You can be at war with Russia then, okay.
Well, everyone else is getting
You're
tanks.
combat ready.
Do we get in a tank?
Huh?
Do we get a tank?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
A
Russians.
septic tank.
What if the Russians come over all the way over here? Or
Yeah.
at the very least, we should get helmets.
Yeah.
You know, I like those.
Colanders.
Yeah. Those World War II ones they were handing out in Kiev.
Yeah.
You know, with the nice.
Brim.
Yeah, it's got a German look.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So what was the question?
Look, it's rhetorical. Are we at war with Russia? And then, of course, sub-question, who the hell is we, Western man?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Because, well, the thing that's provoked the question for me was the kerfuffle over the German foreign minister's statement.
Yeah.
Let's play it. It's in English. I presume she's in Brussels or Berlin. Probably Brussels, hence it's in English so more people can understand. It's very clear to me what she said and what she meant, but it spurred a little bit of a debate in the West this week as to whether or not we are actually fighting a war against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But she knows what she's convinced that we are. So let's hear it. It won't open.
What do you mean it won't open?
I sent it to you, Scott, didn't I? Did you get it? Okay. Well, we've got Baerbock saying yes, we're at war with Russia. Then there's something else that was also in English. Some NATO representative was interviewed by DW, Germany's English language paper. He said he agreed. We are. He didn't quite. He kind of went along with it. It was suggested to him by the interviewer. We can listen to that too, I think, in a minute. Is Twitter not opening or playing for us? Okay, coming along. Now, since the German FM said, yeah, we're Russia, France immediately came out and said, no, we're not. Okay, let's have a listen.
And therefore, I've said already in the last days, yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more also on tanks. But the most important and the crucial part is that we do it together and that we do not do the blame game in Europe because we are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister.
Sounds like there's a bit of not all is rosy in United NATO. The fact that she would even say those things.
Yeah, it's like she's trying to sell the case. What was that? What you mean that she's saying it, but others immediately disagree with her?
No, did you not hear what she said? Play it again there.
She said we are at war with Russia.
No, that's not one. No, that's what I'm talking about. Play it again there. Just it's only short. So.
Yes, we have to do more to defend. And therefore, I've said already in the last days, yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more also on tanks. But the most important and the crucial part is that we do it together and that we do not do the blame game in Europe because we are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other. Thank you.
Thank you,
Why
Madam
would you even
Minister.
say that?
Right.
What do you mean we're not? What do you mean? Why do you feel you have to remind your European colleagues that we're fighting a war against Russia rather than against ourselves, rather than against each other? Doesn't sound very friendly and camaraderie,
Yeah.
and united. You know, it doesn't very Doesn't sound very much like there's a lot of unity in
Right.
NATO there.
That's interesting. So if that was a chief point, and then the "we are at war with Russia" was more like a throwaway thing than anything that could be construed as an official German declaration of war against Russia. That was her main comment, but it was so sensitive, that point, her sort of sub point, that it caused the French foreign minister to issue a formal statement. France is not at war with Russia. Just to clarify, he says, "We are not at war with Russia, and none of our partners are. The delivery of military equipment to Ukraine does not constitute co-belligerence."
So she feels the need to, the German foreign minister feels the need to remind everybody, listen, we're not at war with each other here. Let's get the act together. We're not at war with each other. We should stop this infighting. We need to be unified. And then in response to that, the French foreign minister says, shut up. That's bullshit. We're not at war with Russia. Does he also mean we're not unified? I don't know.
In hindsight, now that I've heard what Scholz said this week, I think I understand what her point was. She's actually speaking in unison with her cabinet colleague, her boss, Olaf Scholz. So it turns out that the agreement on Berlin's part to send tanks to Ukraine would have to be, quote, done in lockstep with the United States.
Yeah.
Let me find this. This is worth reading. Of two passages in this. In lockstep. Of course, he's borrowing a COVID term, but his point is very clear. Guardian report: Germany defiant that lockstep with the US on weapons is the best for Ukraine. So if you scroll down to deadlock, a deadlock on the tanks question was broken last Wednesday when Washington announced it would also send 31 of its own Abrams tanks to Ukraine, meeting a condition that Berlin had reportedly insisted on for releasing its Leopard 2s. This lockstep logic, seemingly followed to avoid Germany being singled out as an aggressor in the eyes of the Kremlin, has been criticized since it appears to question the security guarantee provided by Article 5 of NATO's founding charter.
It's all falling apart. It's all gone wrong.
Well, it's real politics.
It's real politics, which is that
so that's 5, smart by Scholz, in a sense.
Article 5 of NATO is bullshit. There's no substance behind Article 5 of NATO. If any NATO country was attacked, the rest of them would all just go, I have to go and do something else while you're at war with whoever, Russia, particularly Russia. But it shows the disunity of NATO. It shows what she said shows the disunity of NATO.
Yeah.
Exactly the opposite of what they've been saying for the past year, which is, Russia, you just screwed up big time because, you wanted, you thought you were going to destroy NATO. Well, guess what? You did the opposite. You strengthened NATO. In your face. And then the reality is, no, you didn't. You actually did. You actually did what you if that was your intention, then good job, Putin, because that's exactly what you've achieved. But it's not even that. That's the lie in itself, because what he simply has exposed is the fact that there never was any unity in NATO, except there's a bit of unity in NATO when it comes to bombing countries that don't shoot back, like Libya or Syria, or attacking in one way or another with proxy armies, or bombing directly, creating quote-unquote no-fly zones over Libya, or sending proxy armies into and training jihadis in Syria. NATO's fully in lockstep. They're fully in lockstep with the war on terror, which is an open-ended, or they're fully united with the war on terror, which is an open-ended war on whoever, anybody who threatens America's global hegemony. Anywhere in the world gets bombed, and that's not just not limited to bombing countries or bombing quote-unquote terrorists, but rather undermining the governments in countries that America doesn't like. So they're all united on that, because it's all like standing behind America. America's the word policeman. Like we talked about last week, there's this unspoken rule that the Germans themselves said that, listen, the whole point was Germany and to a large extent, or by extension Europe, their policy, their economic, their national policy was cheap oil and gas from Russia, while
security from the US,
while America provides security around the world. So they've always just stood behind, let America do what it wants, do what it felt was needed to protect the international order, right? The international community. The rules-based order established after World War II, Neil. Didn't you hear about that?
I did. Aye, sir.
Over and over again. What about the rules-based order?
I salute the rules-based order.
Good job.
I am a patriot of the rules-based order.
Good job. And if it ever, looks like it's, under threat, then we're all going to stand united, and they're gone. And they're not there. And whatever.
So this is the new pan-NATO line, right? No, it isn't. Viktor Orban this week. West is at war with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
In the New Conservative, he was interviewed by, it was pretty cool actually, Rod Dreher, journalist, decent journalist in the US, New Conservative magazine, the American Conservative magazine. He was at a sit down for 2 hours, along with other American journalists. And yeah, Orban says, yeah, of course we're at war with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The West, it didn't say NATO especially, or Hungary particularly, but yeah, of course we are.
Not Hungary though. When he said
not Hungary, he's trying to avoid that, but the West in general is.
Yeah.
And of course, he's been warning people that the further we go in with this, the more there's going to be a likely rebound. This prompted a CNN explainer as to who's at war and when. I thought this is interesting because, well, I want to hear your take on this as well. Like, at what point is a line crossed? Who decides war is now a war, and therefore these things are allowed, and so on. Like you've given the analogy in the past of, well, if my neighbor's chucking stuff from his own place, am I not entitled to fire back at him? Yes. Okay, but if he's chucking from the street or a third house, am I not?
Mm-hmm. Am I allowed to attack his house?
Yeah, the third. Well, his house rather than the third part, or both.
Or both.
If you got that, look at the CNN one. Does the West decision to arm Ukraine with tanks bring it closer to war with Russia? And if you scroll down to consensus, I think it's in the first part. The consensus among experts is that no NATO member is anywhere near what could be considered to be being at war with Russia by any internationally accepted legal definition. Therefore, the idea that the alliance is at war with Russia is a non-starter. War would require strikes carried out by US or NATO forces in uniform attacking from NATO territory against Russian forces, territory, or the Russian people. Explains some expert.
War would require strikes carried out by US or NATO forces in uniform attacking from NATO territory against Russian forces, Russian territory, Russian pop, blah, blah, blah.
Which, of course, just leaves open proxy war.
So you just take it over a border.
What about the 10 years of Operation Sycamore Timber in Syria? I mean, we'll just gloss over all the proxy wars we do,
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the question, how you define war, how you define being at war. We just stretch it out, we stretch out the definition,
Yeah.
Expand it out like it was saying previously. Any war. Okay, people might think. I mean, the question that's been brought up in this context is if one country enables arms another country, arms one side in a conflict. Is that country that's arming one side in a conflict a party to the conflict? Well, technically no, because you go back to the original. Well, you go back to the way things have operated for a very long time in the world in terms of conflicts is that usually lots of other countries are supplying weapons. Well, there's the international arms
or the
trade,
raw materials for that matter.
Yeah, anything really. But let's say weapons are. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to, dig into it, you could start accusing people of being at war, but for supplying anything, unless you completely cut off all ties with a country who's in conflict, then you're part of the war. That's a bit extreme, right? But obviously, if you limit it to weapons, then at least you've got something to discuss, right?
Yeah,
you're piling weapons into the armed forces of one country in conflict. Therefore, you're kind of a part of the war. But for a very long time, there's the international arms trade, right, which is going on all the time, and there are low-intensity conflicts going on around the world all the time. I think America hasn't not been at war of some kind since the Civil War. I think it's since the Civil War.
In an official sense,
Not officially, but in one way or another. Like they have in some way or other had troops.
Yeah,
Either in some way party to a conflict somewhere in the world.
The British record was worse, actually. Not overall. Over United States history, 200 and something years, they have greater years at war.
Yeah.
But Britain's modern record is worse. No one ever thinks about that. Since 1914, Britain has been at war consecutively in terms of military engagement by our expanded definition. Officially, no, they're not at war. But they've had troops firing something every year somewhere else consecutively since 1914, since the Great War.
Yeah.
Every year.
So when you realize that, then you go, well, okay, how do you define war? You know, how do you define being at war? If they themselves have this definition where we're not actually at war, it has to be some official declaration of war by government and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's nonsense, right? You can't, because like for Congress, for example, hasn't officially declared war somewhere, but there are 100,000 US troops involved in a conflict. Let's dispense with the bullshit narrative terminology and limit it to, at the very least, you limit it to, if you have troops in a country shooting guns at someone, they're at war, right? The kind of dictionary definition of war, you know, when troops, your actual active military troops are in a foreign country shooting at
killing people.
Yeah.
For quote-unquote legitimate reasons.
Yeah.
They're killing people.
Yeah. But so it's obviously something that no one's ever going to agree on, but it's being exploited in Ukraine right now. The limits of kind of credulity, let's say, for what defines being at war are being stretched quite far at this point. You know, of course they could go further, but anybody with any reasonable person, I would say, would recognize at this point that the US in particular, and to a lesser extent NATO countries, are at war with Russia.
CNN says otherwise.
Over a third, primarily involving a third party. So it's a proxy war, you know, in a certain sense. It's you're getting someone else to fight your enemy, but you're helping that someone else to fight your enemy.
If your forces are, like the CNN expert says, in uniform, in the territory in question, so not NATO territory, they're in Ukraine, training 25,000 soldiers, but they get out supposedly like hours to spare before Russia attacks and invades, and they're just over the border. Whew. Thank God we weren't there when they started. Otherwise, we would have been at war. I mean, is that the definition?
Well, it's all about the optics, right?
Okay, so here's another scenario: you've left, you're not there. Okay, you're not in it, you're not party to it, but it turns out a year later, you covertly send in several hundred here, several hundred there, not in a uniform. They go, incognito, or they wear Ukrainian colors. Are you at war?
Well, it's
because you're not wearing the uniform. It's false flag.
It gets nonsensical at a certain point. Just put up that one and search for propaganda there, Scotty. Just on that, since I said optics, this is about talking about the tanks, right? So that paragraph above there says, this dude, Drew Thompson, a visiting senior research fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Anyway, he says that the Pentagon is good at solving difficult logistical issues. And this is relating to the promise to send Abrams tanks. And he says, but the risk is high to both the US and Ukraine. And he says, and he explains then, saying, think of the propaganda victory for President Putin if pictures emerge of disabled American tanks on a Ukrainian battlefield.
Which they will.
Think of the propaganda victory. So we want to avoid that propaganda victory at all costs. America, like I've said before, 50% of America's military power, military prowess in the world since, let's say, the Second World War comes from
the projection of dominance,
the appearance of dominance, or the talking up of their dominance, but yeah, so that is the reason why Schultz only agreed to send X number of Leopards tanks to Ukraine if America would agree to send Abrams. So we're all in this together, aren't we? Like COVID, we're all in this together. So, but the thing is that, again, this is just optics, because not only is it to save Germany's ass, to not make it look like in that CNN article, not make it look like Germany is going alone here. This is a repeat of World War II where Germany goes alone against the Soviet army. No, let's not. Let's try and downplay that imagery and let's have America and other countries send. But of course, Germany's going to send most of the tanks. But we'll send in 30. We'll say 30 Abrams. There you go. 30 Abrams from America. So we're all in this together. So it's not just you, Germany. So we're all united, right? But of course, the Abrams tanks aren't going to come from American stock. They're going to be made brand new.
Really?
So, yes.
Okay.
So they're going to be made in the factory. So
Isn't that more expensive?
Maybe, but they have to be. I mean, they can't send the ones they have. Well, a lot of the ones they have what do you call it? Uranium armor, and they won't give uranium armor.
The so-called secret armor.
Secret armor, secret armor, super secret. It's so secret that it's called uranium armor.
Why won't they? Why don't they want that? Because of radiation poisoning.
No. Just because they don't want Ukraine to win. No, I don't know exactly why.
Okay.
I think they don't want. Maybe I thought maybe they don't.
It's a trade secret, and they don't want the Russians capturing
to get it.
an Abrams
Of course,
intact,
right?
Which they will do.
Right. So it'll be 12 months at least before any of those so-called Abrams come, which is a complete joke. It just shows you the propaganda aspect.
12 months, yeah, that's not.
So in a year's time, they might get these 30 Abrams that the Americans have promised. So it's just a public relations operation, basically, to not make it look like Germany is really the main one sending tanks to Ukraine, when in fact they actually are the main ones. And any other tanks are just token. British Challenger tanks may or may not get there. Who knows when, whatever. It's the ones that can go now.
There. Yeah.
Well, the ones that can go now and get there now are Leopard tanks. And the main point about this was Poland. Poland has quite a number of Leopard tanks, and they're the ones who want to send them because Poland's right on the border, right? So the first Leopard tanks from Germany, quote unquote, from Germany, are coming directly from Poland, that are already in Poland and will be given to.
Poland's very excited by this news.
Yeah.
Very excited. They're sending their Leopards, yes, in lockstep. Quantity-wise, yes, but they're also sending, turns out they've been discreetly modernizing some Soviet tanks they still have. Don't know what mark it is, T-90 or something, about 30 of them. So like Poland's like, oh good, green light, let's go. So they're sending a lot more. There's some queer thing about the German number of 14 Leopard tanks. Maybe this is nothing, but people notice that they're sending 14 initially, and ultimately they have earmarked 88. 1488. Do you know what that is?
Oh, the number?
it's 1488. It's supposedly a Nazi dog whistle, a neo-Nazi dog whistle. Representing the letters, something that Hitler said, the 14 words about saving the white race or something, and 88 is, Heil Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think
that's intended, but it's an interesting little signature on it. That a reality quirk, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Scholz's strategy is interesting. I mean, if you were in his position, he probably did the single smartest thing he could have done, which is to say, I'm under we saw it last week, enormous pressure to do something here. I'm going to have to write in the Americans, because if they're just pushing us and then pushing Poland, and we're all just going over here to war, I've got to pull these people in some way, So I think Merkel would have done the same thing.
He's under enormous pressure from who?
The USA.
And why is he caving to that pressure? Why are the Germans caving to that pressure?
Well,
they clearly don't really want to. They've been dragging their feet in the whole to plan weapons, Ukraine and stuff.
The whole post-war architecture, like you described, Germany does the business, makes the stuff. America has permanently 40,000 troops stationed there, nuclear weapons in Germany. You don't say no to them ever. Like that guy said, there was some elder statesman on German TV, and someone subbed into English what he said recently. He's like, the history has been pretty good. Most of the time when we want something, we get it when we're in disagreement. But when it comes to important things, international geopolitics, the Americans get their way, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. Well, they've been put in a bind. I mean, Germany in particular, because of its dependence on for its industry on cheap Russian oil and gas and stuff. But they've been put in a bind by America over this whole situation. It's once they found themselves in a situation where they had crossed a barrier, crossed the line in antagonism towards Russia and falling out with Russia. It's like, well, now we have to follow through with this situation and get on board with America's agenda. And the agenda was set by America, i.e. the weakening and ideally some form of destruction or disempowerment of Russia. Germany and other European countries had to get on board in it, particularly Germany, to a lesser extent other countries, but as well. Because this is an explanation as to why they keep saying we have to win. It's terrible if Russia loses, or it's terrible if Russia wins and we lose. If Ukraine loses, we lose. The West loses. The world loses. The international community loses. Everybody loses. It's terrible. It's disaster. It's like, why are you putting so much emphasis on a regional conflict, basically?
Like the world's going to end.
And even over Crimea, you're really not even talking about the whole of Ukraine. You're talking about Crimea. Who controls Crimea and 20% of the territory of Ukraine, the Donbass? Why are you making this into a massive international do or die situation over very small pieces of real estate? But they have, because that's America's agenda. Well, America's agenda. We've talked about this before, but it is obviously an agenda driven by America. And once they got the Europeans roped into it, the Europeans have to follow through with it and have to commit to it, although they're still trying to hedge the bets. In fact, there was an article last week we were talking about where a guy who said some insider in the German government said that there's still a feeling that this can all be kind of be made to go away, and out of it Germany would continue to have, or would regain, good relations with Russia and access to cheap Russian gas and oil. That the Germans still hold out hope of having some kind of something like the relationship they had with Russia, economically at least, and and everything else, and every other way that they had before. Yeah. But it seems that as things progress and the antagonism is increased, and it looks more and more like, we're not going to be friends for a long time after this. Germany realizes that it has to throw a slot in with the American agenda. It has to push on through. It has to, see it through to the end of Russia being weakened, so that when this is over, because they all have eyes on when this is over, quote unquote, they just haven't decided when it's going to be over. Of course, it could be over tomorrow, almost literally, if America decided it. America could end the conflict tomorrow, but it doesn't. It wants to keep the conflict going. It could just say, okay, Crimea is for Russia, no big deal. Donbass, People's Republic, whatever, those people obviously want independence from Ukraine, so let them have it. The 80% of the landmass of Ukraine becomes Ukraine, and we stop this conflict, stop the destruction, stop the damage to the global economy. But they're not saying any of that, because Russia has to be weakened. Because out of that, in that scenario where you let Russia, quote unquote, win, then Russia is in a dominant position, and it's very dangerous for Europe. America thinks it's very dangerous for Europe then, and the Germans probably wouldn't be too happy about it either, being in a more subservient position than before the conflict vis-a-vis Russia. That Russia would have the upper hand, because Russia won, Russia would be able to dictate terms, and Europe would be weakened in terms of its relationship with Russia compared to what it was before, which was more equal. Okay, Russia had influence because it was, but justified influence because it's selling cheap Russian oil and gas to keep European industry thriving. How is that? Like, it's almost like it's like they're a bunch of freaking snowflakes, you know what I mean? They're a bunch of woke snowflakes in the Washington establishment, you know what I mean? That's their policy. Their policy is woke, snowflakey, radical lefty geopolitics, where any country that has resources and that can sell them easily and cheaply to other countries, that's unfair. That's an unfair advantage. It's like, again, someone who's good at, who's built and has genetics for winning a sprint race. That's unfair. It's unfair that they should be hobbled. Someone break their ankle, and then we'll run against them. That's the attitude of the Americans. The Americans is it's unfair that Russia has this access to large quantities of natural resources, oil, gas, and other natural resources that it can supply to its neighbors in Europe, and thereby kind of pushing America economically to the sidelines. And America's like, no way, unfair. We want equity. We want equality of outcome. in
Woke
this situation.
geopolitics.
It is. That's what it is. It's woke
Okay.
geopolitics. That's what's going on, and that and you could draw a connection between why that's taken over society. You know what I mean? Spreading out from Washington DC essentially, and
It's
and
the American
North.
narcissism gone global.
Yeah.
Wokery.
So,
But the question that's on everyone's mind, but they're either too afraid to ask, or they just ask, the thought enters the head and then they go, no, I won't even think that. Thankfully, Washington made a very clear answer for us. Everything's going to be fine. Have a look at this. White House estimates chances of Russia attacking NATO 0. NATO countries are not in danger of being attacked by Russia, John Kirby said Wednesday. We've got enough troops to repel a possible Russian strike on its eastern flank. All I can tell you is we've seen absolutely no indication that Putin has designs on striking NATO territory, stressing that US President Biden is taking Washington's Article 5 commitment seriously.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, that's like, they've set themselves up for like a surprise. Maybe he's right. I mean, maybe, well, I don't know. Is that confidence merited?
Right now, yes.
Okay.
Right now it is. Like I said, Abrams, are they even going to get there? If they do, it'll be a year. They're talking about F-16s, training Ukrainian pilots in F-16s and delivering F-16s to Ukraine. That's all talk. Would that ever happen? Maybe it would happen. It would happen like down the line. You know, it would happen in a year's time or in 2 years' time. But these people think that this conflict is going to go on for that period of time. They think it's going to extend out that long, and that was their agenda. They're happy with that. That's why they're fueling the conflict to keep it going for as long as possible. Because, but in that scenario, I don't know if it got to, again, F-16s. What do F-16s change? Not much. Russia has control over the airspace. They'll just shoot them down. Talk about bad optics of an Abrams tank burning in Ukraine. Super bad optics of an F-16 being splashed across the social media, you know, going down the ball of flames, you know. The pride of Tom Cruise in it, maybe, as well. You know what I mean? Horrible.
Yeah.
So that'll be the last Top Gun movie. Like, you know, it wouldn't be in part 3, like, you know. So the point is that as everybody should know, anybody with any sense knows that the US is behind this conflict in Ukraine. In fact, I have something. I don't know if there's any point in doing this, but just to make the point, I don't know if we already. I don't think I've heard this one, but this is Mike Pompeo. This is the "we lied, we cheated, we stole." Mike Pompeo, former director of the CIA under Trump, who was talking, that quote, "we lied, we cheated, we stole," is from him, a presentation he gave at West Point, where basically that's what he said. That's what we taught every day we got up, and we taught them how to lie, cheat, and steal. You know, the recruits for the CIA. Anyway, have a listen here. He just says basically what everybody should know.
You should know that the Ukrainian Defense Forces have been trained by the United States for an awfully long time. When I was a CIA director, I was in Southeast Ukraine on more than one occasion. We were helping them with special operating forces stuff. That's about all I can say. But the American people should be proud of the fact that we didn't risk American lives, but we did that kind of good work training others to actually defend their own country. And as a result of that, you see some pretty darn good successes by the Ukrainian military.
Yeah, 2 points on that. Obviously, he's admitting that they have been training the Ukrainian army for a very long time, and specifically 2014 after the US-backed coup in Ukraine. But it's also interesting that he was a Trumper, right? He was Trump's, you know, guy in the CIA, basically, blah, blah, blah. But more and more, you look at all these people who are in the Trump administration, the high-level appointees in the Trump administration, and they've all since Trump, they have all shown exactly where their allegiances lie and have lain and have always lain, which is with the establishment. Like Trump, as he's saying this, Trump is coming out and making tweets about, you know, that Ukraine conflict is a disaster and needs to be stopped straight away. Trump is, you know, it's very clear that Trump was on his own in his administration, despite the, you know, opportunistic support that people like Pompeo might have given to him because he was a president and they were in power. They were taking advantage of that, but that was just for show. Trump had no support for any of his agendas. during his administration from anybody, regardless, no matter who you think. The only ones that he had support from are the guys who ended up in prison.
Right.
Michael Flynn and
Bannon.
and a few others. That was it, which is pretty sad, you know. But so he's been, you know, the US started this conflict on purpose. They're behind it, right? They're the reason there's a conflict in Ukraine right now. Because, like I said, they've been arming and training and funding the Ukrainian army for 8 years with a specific purpose of attempting to invade or planning to invade. That's why the front line is where the front line is along Donbass. That's why all the Ukrainian soldiers are there and why the front line is kind of raging right now along the borders of Donbass with a view to retaking Donbass and retaking Crimea. That was their intent. And part of this conflict was obviously to do that, to threaten Russia, to weaken Russia. But in roping in what they've done since then, and this was part of the plan all along as well, to rope in Europe, the part of the goal is to weaken Europe as well, which is what they're doing. I mean, they destroyed Nord Stream 2 specifically. So you're talking about geopolitics here and natural resources and Russia's influence over Europe via its natural resources, and how that negatively impacts on American hegemony. So their goal was to weaken Europe, the European Union, their so-called allies, by further alienating them from Russia, turning them into the enemies of Russia, because the Americans have realized long before now that American hegemony was at serious risk, or under threat, and on the way down, on the way out, basically, and they couldn't stop it. And there is not enough realism for them to realize that they can't stop that from happening because of the rise of powerful kind of peer competitors, Russia, China, and other countries. And the world has changed, and America can't rule anymore as it has. So the solution is to weaken, to continue to maintain American hegemony in a new world created by America of weak states, including its allies. Everybody gets it. Everybody gets it in the neck. So you weaken as many countries in the world as possible, because previously you could control the world because most of all of the countries in the world were effectively weak states or client states of yours, states that you owned, that America controlled. That's changed with the rise of Russia and China. So America says, okay, we need to weaken not just Russia and China, but everybody.
Yeah.
So
that there's no field of victory to grab.
We bring it down.
There's no market to gain.
Right.
From your quote unquote victory.
Right. We can still control the world, but we have to remake the world and have to globally weaken everything, bring it all down a few pegs so we remain on top. And that's what they do to their allies as well. But of course, Europeans, long being in the position of Igor to America's Dr. Frankenstein, aren't in any position to do anything about it, to really to stop it,
Yeah.
Victoria Nuland was in, much to my chagrin, I had to actually see her and listen to her this week. I think she's in Congress or something like that. I think this is on Friday, yeah. So she's a White House official, again, under Biden, of course. And here's what she said, just to back up the point that I was making a minute ago about Nord Stream 2. Here she doubles down on Nord Stream.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
So, someone should tell Victoria that Nord Stream was actually designed to be a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. That's, by definition, what a pipeline is. What she really means is a broken hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea, broken by America and by way of blowing it up. And then here she is again in the same discourse, talking about her other favorite Favorite hobby?
Have a very excellent chargé who is doing most of the on-the-ground contact work, but our Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasia, Karen Donfried, has been meeting with Belarusians, as has her deputy, Robin Donegan, at regular intervals to test whether there might be any openings there. I would not say that we've had manifest success, but also working intensively with the Belarusian opposition and Madam Tuneska.
Mama Nuland hungry. Want coup. I bring cookies. I bring cookies for coup. Me hungry.
Minsk next. No, you tried Minsk in 2020. It failed, sweetie.
Although that brings up, I mean, obviously Belarus is a potential weak point, and it brings up. I mean, I don't think I'd go with this fully, but I mean, there's all that build up in Belarusia of Belarusian and Russian forces over the past going on a few months now. Everybody assumes that's preparation for an offensive south over the Belarusian border into Ukraine, but you have to wonder as well if it's not just basically a defensive force against who knows what. I mean, they're trying to game all sorts of opposition, all sorts of scenarios, but
yeah, well, she just said we're hoping for openings.
Yeah,
open society. We want to open Belarus, so
open the border, open the border so Polish troops can flood through.
For example,
I don't know if that's the case. I still tend to think that the build-up of troops in Belarus is about an offensive at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But there's no rush on that respect, you know. So yeah.
On this war spreading, see the drone attack in Iran. Now the Iranians said they shot it down, but it looks like there were 3 drones. One hit what Israeli media is reporting was a drone factory.
Yeah.
The Iranians just say a workshop. That's probably related to Iranian supply of cheap drones that are super effective in hitting American weapons in Ukraine.
I mean, by implication, it's an attack. It's a move against Russia,
right?
Russia's operations in Ukraine, right? Because unless of course, there's really spin it as well. These are potentially drones that could be used against Israel, so we need to take them out. So it's all smoke and mirrors and lies and bullshit and stuff. But my thing about the F-16s in Ukraine isn't. I mean, I think there is a source for it actually. It's in Russian, but this is just the tweet someone sent, and there is a source just below it in Russian. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, Ukraine has begun preparing airfield infrastructure for F-16 fighters. You know, that's obviously, you got to understand that they can prepare their airfield infrastructure for F-16 fighters all they want, but if Ukrainians are going to fly them, it's not going to happen for quite a long time, you know, because whatever Ukrainian pilots are left, they have no experience in F-16 fighters, and it takes quite a long time to train you to effectively use an F-16 fighter. And you'd have to do that obviously outside of Ukraine. So again, that's like the Abrams tank. Put it off a year, 2 years, if it's even going to happen, you know. But
it could. Things are changing fast week to week. I mean, let's assume they're going to fulfill the top Ukrainian general's wish list. Zaluzhny, he said, "I need a new army." This would be the third army. At what point they seem confident at the moment that Russia's not moving, so we'll just carry on what we've done before. We'll build them a third army.
Mm-hmm.
So far, there's no reason for NATO to not keep pursuing that strategy. Let's keep going. Okay, it's only token numbers of tanks. I read an analysis that said realistically, just for Ukraine to defend the existing 800-kilometer front, they need 1,800 tanks this year or by summer. Maybe that'll trickle in. Maybe it'll happen fast. Maybe it'll snowball, right? And they end up getting a third army. Does Russia go, oh, God, okay, well, yeah, okay, we'll take that out too.
If
and
we
then
have
it goes, we're in the third iteration here, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'll get back to that in a minute, but there's just on the NATO talking points about, is that guy Admiral Rob Bauer?
Yes.
He's the head of NATO Strategy Council. He's all about the strategizing. Here he is talking to some, I think it's DW.
Yeah.
Divella.
I referred to that earlier, yeah.
Yeah, you can just play that. We don't want to listen to it all.
We are ready to a direct confrontation with Russia.
We are.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think what we have done after the war started was the battle groups along the eastern flank. We had 4 in the north, the 3 Baltic states and Poland, the enhanced forward presence battle groups. We have decided now, the leaders in Madrid have decided to create 4 more battle groups in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, and to basically strengthen those battle groups, make them a little bit larger, give them a little bit more support in terms of fire support, and give them better stocks for ammunition and other things. So I think that is an important message for the Russians, that our posture has changed, to show them that we are ready if they would have an idea to come to NATO. And that is the red line. If there is any red line, it is the Russians crossing the line of our territory in NATO.
I believe you said that we are ready to scale up, but that will require some focus. I believe it was your expression. What do you mean by that?
I said that with regard to industrial capacity,
Okay.
the defense capacity. Because I think
we don't have much.
What we see on both sides is there's high use of ammunition. There's a lot of destruction in terms of vehicles and tanks and aircraft, and there's a lot of things that require to be bought on both sides to continue the fight in material and in ammunition. So the challenge for both sides is that the industries, the defense industries in the West and in Russia, need to ramp up production. And basically have an economy now that is just in time, just enough. Everything we do in the West in the last 25 years was based on that idea. Having stocks was not smart because it was dead money. But we now see, so if you order a car, they will start the production after you ordered the car. And we're talking now that, hey, I'm using more ammunition than I thought. I need to take from a warehouse ammunition.
But the warehouse is empty.
You're talking about stocks. You're talking about things that are there, not because you necessarily needed them, but once you need them badly, because the production in the battlefield is going up. And we saw we saw in the pandemic with medical equipment and
whatever.
material. So
very good.
Such a corporatist, mercantilist, Western
but just shows
wet blanket. Mind you, we can mock him, but that guy in that role, his predecessor has just been elected president of the Czech Republic.
Yeah, well, it's
These
good,
people are
good for your career progression, but it's not much good for fighting wars, you know. Here's Trump, just so people know Trump's take on Ukraine, with the usual bit of Trump bombast, which we always look forward to.
Through weakness and incompetence, Joe Biden has brought us to the brink of World War III. We're at the brink of World War III, just in case anybody doesn't know it. As president, I will bring back peace through strength. Peace through strength would have never happened. If I was president, there would not have been a war with Russia in Ukraine. Zero chance, and Lindsey would be happy with that. That's better than any alternative. Wouldn't have happened. And I will say this, even now, despite tremendous loss of lives and destruction of much of that country, I would have a peace deal negotiated within 24 hours. You could make a peace deal, you could make a deal for both right now, 24 hours.
Yep, and that's why you'll never be president again.
Peace to strength, peace to strength. He's giving a shout out to Lindsey Graham, who you hear go, yeah, off to his left. He's got Lindsey Graham helping him kick off his campaign. For God's sake, Lindsey Graham would not have wanted a peace deal in Ukraine. No. Lindsey Graham was he was just salivating with excitement over the fact that this war is going to go on, and Ukrainians are going to, quote, die until the last, fight until the last Ukrainian.
It's job justification. I mean, on that point, I mean, it's very clear that the NATO is not interested, and by NATO I mean, you know, the US in particular, is not interested in Ukraine, has no no real intent for Ukraine to actually win this conflict. They keep talking about it, but they have no intent. If they had the intent, they would be doing a lot more if they're really committed. But they're not committed. They're not willing to put any real skin in the game, and they know therefore that Ukraine is going to lose ultimately. But they're betting on the longer the conflict goes on, the easier it is for them to organize the kind of chess pieces. Like I said, that Europe will take a significant nosedive in terms of influence and power and wealth. And if something kicks off in China, they're preparing for that as well. Trying to take China down. They're willing to downgrade the entire global economy in order for them to stay on top. So the idea of Ukraine winning is just narrative and bullshit for the masses, for the idiot masses out there who are all like bleeding heart, Slavic Ukrainian stuff. They're just to keep them on board. But the goal is to try and, in a certain sense, bleed Russia a little bit, but at the serious expense of Ukraine. Like Orban, you're talking about Orban earlier on, he basically said that Ukraine is, he said he compared it to like compared it to Afghanistan, calling it a nobody country or a nothing country.
No man's land.
Did he say no man's land? He said...
Yeah, the land of nobody.
The land of nobody.
Brackets, the editor, Rob Dreyer, said, I think he meant no man's land.
Or maybe yeah, no man's land. So it's going to be just a
wasteland, yeah.
A wasteland, and that's the goal. They hope, Of course, Russia has a different intent for Ukraine. It has a more positive intent for Ukraine, which is that, if they can bring it to the point where Ukraine actually is defeated and they can force effectively a surrender from Ukraine, and then Ukraine can be slowly rebuilt and not become a no man's land, not become a wasteland. But the West is fully prepared for Ukraine to be a no man's land.
This is really the linchpin to understanding everything that's happened since 9/11. You remember back in the day, like Afghanistan, Iraq, it's a war for oil, stupid. It was, yes. And then people would share maps of what they were planning, and what's his name, Pepe Escobar, talk about Pipelineistan. They want to get, what's her name? The Condoleezza Rice was involved with a company that wants a contract for this pipeline coming through Afghanistan, and they want to compete with the Russians and the Chinese, and that's what. And that made sense, except it didn't, because 20 years later, as Trump would say, they sunk all the money in. Where's the pipeline? There's none. That's a win for them. That's the point.
Yeah, no pipelines.
And remember, halfway through the war, Afghanistan, oh my God, we just discovered there's about $14 trillion worth of rare earth minerals under this barren soil.
Mm-hmm. Nobody gets it.
No, nobody gets it.
Right.
That's the
Of
point.
course, that's the whole point.
The point isn't that we are out, it's not a scramble for Africa where Europeans gobbled up as many resources as they could and ended up clashing with each other in Africa 100 years ago. This is different. This is America saying, no, I'm kicking up dust everywhere and no one gets it.
Mm-hmm.
I want sand and death, to use Trump's term, everywhere.
Yeah, you got to. You want, if you want to rule the world, you have to keep all of your other competitors weak. You can't let any of them rise up. You can't let any of them, if possible, have access to any more natural resources. You can't let them develop in a way that they naturally would, because they will, especially if they're not your vassals, basically, if they're not of like mind, they're going to be your competitor, and you can't have that. So you go in and you stop things from developing. You keep as many places as possible poor and impoverished, so they're more easily controlled. It's sick, twisted thinking, but that's the thinking that goes on in the halls, in the bowels of Washington, D.C., and has done for an awful long time. Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of what's going on in Ukraine, I mean, again, it's still slow. I mean, they're making some good progress along the in the little towns of Ugledar, Bakhmut. There's that front line, like we've talked about this front line for a long time, and the reason that front line is there is because it was designed to be there from the beginning as an offensive position, defensive/offensive position, really an offensive position originally in its original conception, offensive position to launch offensives into Donbass and take Donbass and then take Crimea, and from there then, well, you've got a mobilized army that has gone through some kind of a conflict to take those two territories that would then be eager for more and could, at the very least, be a serious ongoing threat right on Russia's border. That was the intent all along. So that's why you have this line along the more or less along the Donbass region that Russia has, been has been pushing back, and its goal is ultimately to take all of Donbass, all of the territory of Donbass, and the other two regions, Zaporizhia and
complete with a seaport in the Sea of Azov, built by the British Navy.
Right. So that's the goal. That's why the front line is there, and they're making good progress right now. Like I said, in some key towns along their Bakhmut. They've taken Soledar. Bakhmut is ongoing. Ugledar is ongoing. What they're basically, the Russians are slowly just going about the same process they've been going about for quite a long time, is to degrade and destroy the Ukrainian military force to the point that they can open, let's say that it collapses to some extent, and they can open a hole or a breach in that front line, with the rest, most of it degraded enough to an acceptable extent. And from there, then they push through, they pour through, because on the other side of that front line, where most of the combat-ready Russian or Ukrainian forces are and their military equipment, if that collapses on the other side of that, there isn't much to stop them, to stop the Russian forces. And again, you're talking about the mobilization that happened started a few months ago, them being ready to push through. And at that point, in theory, that would be the end of the story for Ukraine. Once that front line would be significantly degraded and big enough holes would open up in it for Russian forces to pour through, basically, into the rest of Ukraine. That's what they're working on, and they're going about it bit by bit, and it's getting pretty bad, because they're attriting the Ukrainian military, the proxy force, America's proxy force. They're attriting it, and that's the agenda. There's no motivation or good reason for any major kind of offensive, major arrow offensive by the Russians, to try and bring an end to this conflict or win categorically all at once type thing. That clearly wasn't the agenda from the beginning, and isn't the agenda now. And they're happy to preserve their own forces. They have had for quite a long time, or something like a 7 or 8 to 1 casualty rate, basically, where 7 times as many Ukrainian soldiers are dying as Russian soldiers. Of course, you'll hear the exact opposite of that. I've heard seen recent estimates of 300,000 to 500,000 dead or injured. Don't know. It seems unlikely to me that it would be up to 500,000, because I think the figure was about 600,000 they had. Although you see the video evidence of them pulling people off the streets left, right, and centre. It's not looking good. They're getting pretty desperate.
And anyone who posts anything like that risks prison time or worse.
Yeah,
the hand of the SBU.
Yeah.
So they're the videos that do get up.
Yeah. So there's obviously more to come as the kind of conflict grinds on and stuff, and what the Americans do if they escalate more, and if there's any red lines, what Russia's red lines are. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, they said this week, for what it's worth, Russia, of course, said modern Western tanks to Ukraine means the West is now party to war.
Yeah, what that means, don't know.
Is that the red line? So Berlin by Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, raising the Chechen flag over the Reichstag.
They want you to believe that. They want you to think that.
Or the Royal Crest. Oh, I can dream.
Bill Gates, he's wrong about most things, but he has an opinion on conflict as well. He has an opinion on everything. But it's all about the pandemics and the climate change and the wars and how we're all going to die, and only he can save us, basically. Here he is on Ukraine just recently.
Ukrainian government is one of the worst in the world. Corrupt, controlled by a few rich people. I mean, really unfortunate for the people in Ukraine.
Are you sure that's recent? Because that's very un-PC.
I think he was talking about in terms of the recent resignations in the Ukrainian government, that because of corruption, basically. People
So they
looting.
said, was it corruption or was
Well,
it preventing a coup?
Maybe one or the other, or both.
Both at once.
Probably both. I mean, there's all sorts of corruption going on. Under these conditions, there's corruption up the wazoo in the Ukrainian government. There's already significantly corrupt anyway.
100%.
And then under the fog of war type thing, I mean,
It's a wild east. It's just,
They're doing
it always
exactly-
has been, but it's worse now.
They're doing exactly the same thing that, of course, it's par for the course in those kind of conflicts, especially Western inspired conflicts.
Look at Iraq. The billions of cash.
Halliburton, yeah. What do you call it? Halliburton and other companies in the Iraq War that were charging ridiculous amounts of money for cleaning services, for meals for troops, and making hundreds of millions of dollars from the American taxpayer by massively overcharging for supplying the American military in Iraq for a decade or more. The exact same thing's going on in Ukraine, and of course the government Interior Ministry officials in Ukraine are tasked with brokering those kind of contracts with suppliers for meals, for example, for Ukrainian troops, and they get a company who'll pass them a nice big fat brown envelope, and then they'll give them a $350 million contract to supply crappy meals to Ukrainian troops that cost 1/10 of that in reality. So
yeah,
I think there's actually
the great Ukrainian
story in that.
Dougal.
Huh? Yeah.
Let them keep at it. We'll see how long it lasts.
It's crazy though. Like, I mean, it's just feckless idiocy.
The thing is, when it happens, well, I don't know. The world's going to get really chaotic afterwards. All things being equal, well, what would happen is that Russia would win, and you would see a whole other Ukraine. It would be basically reborn. It would be modernized. It would be fair. It would be peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Things would get built. Things would work. But I'm dreaming because things that are coming, even the master plan you just outlined before of knocking the whole world down several pegs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crying shame because, well, we can get some glimpses of it in liberated Mariupol, which is being rebuilt, already by the Russians. Obviously Crimea as well. I mean, ask anyone there, and it's like stuff's being done now that should have been done 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine objectively would be in better hands under Russian control, but will we ever see the day?
Probably not.
Did you see this? Do you want to move on to something else?
Yeah.
Or stay there? Terror attacks in Israel. I mean,
is that something else? Sounds like more of the same to me.
It's more of the same, but it's like it's really dodgy what happened. So right as Bibi Netanyahu returns, still under a cloud of corruption and investigations and stuff, there's a raid on an IDF conducted a raid on the Jenin refugee camp in northern West Bank.
Jenin, yeah.
Here's the first of our links in this. It left 9 people killed. It's the highest death toll actually in any single, excluding the bombardments of Gaza, in any single so-called policing operation by Israel since 2005. This happened on Thursday. Israeli forces killed 9 Palestinians during West Bank raid. Israel claims all but one were wanted, suspected militants, blah, blah, blah. But people who were there said it was mental what they did. The IDF said it conducted an unusual daytime operation. They've been pestering Jenin at night, but this is full daylight. They ventured deep into the camp because of, quote, intelligence suggesting a cell linked to Palestinian Islamic Jihad was planning to carry out imminent attacks against Israelis. Well, there had been no attacks, maybe because they prevented it, right? That's always their narrative. So this guy who was here, Sakir Kader, he's a Palestinian Dutch filmmaker. He witnessed and he said armed Palestinians shot at an Israeli armored vehicle, quote, disguised as a commercial van, at which point the IDF returned fire and a fierce 4-hour gun battle ensued, causing widespread damage. 4 hours. To be clear, like, you think, well, they have to go after terrorists. The troops, this is from an Israeli report now I'm reading, troops use shoulder-launched missiles and other explosives against the hideout. In a tactic, apparently it's routine, in a tactic known as, quote, pressure cooker, to try and flush out the wanted men. Well, they flushed them out all right. Apparently there's 9 dead people. So, okay, that's just another day in the life of living under the most insane regime on the planet. But then that was Thursday. On Friday, a day later, a synagogue in East Jerusalem probably meaning it's where settlers are living in recently bulldozed or forcibly evicted Palestinian homes. A synagogue in East Jerusalem was shot at. It's also noteworthy because it's the highest, if this is a terror attack, it's the highest terrorist attack death toll in Israel, again, since the mid-2000s, almost 20 years. Let's have a look at this, also from The Guardian. I picked The Guardian because, well, let's go with a pro-Israeli. I mean, you get the most... Even when you're reading like the most compliant, generally, don't rock the boat with the Zionists articles, they're still horrifying, like against Israel. So the report says 7 Israelis have been shot and killed as they left a synagogue yesterday, Friday. A gunman in a car waited until Shabbat prayers ended in a neighborhood of Israeli settlers in occupied East Jerusalem. He waited, and then as they came out, he opened fire. And the attack yesterday, by the way, was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Arabic, if you scroll down, I want people to see this one. Do a search for Hebrew. This is a red flag for me. Arabic and Hebrew media reports identified him as a 21-year-old who did not have a security record. The Israelis know everything. They know what everyone eats for breakfast in the West Bank. It is the most high-tech mass surveillance place on the planet. That sounds iffy to me. Anyway, whatever. The report concludes at that point, 2 days ago, Friday, 32 Palestinians were killed in the last month. Again, this is the kind of highest death toll in a couple of decades. It's a very intense right now. Okay, so then Saturday, another synagogue was hit, also in East Jerusalem. No one was killed here, though, but this is kind of a tell for me. Like the other 21-year-old perpetrator, this one is a kid, though. He's 13. 13 years old. In both incidents, Israel says they were neutralized. Security forces arrived and saying shot him dead. End of story. They were also both stressing, quote, that they'd acted alone, and, quote, they were not connected with any terrorist organization. Done and dusted. And yet, Israel is now conducting, you see in the headline there, mass arrests up and down the place. And Bibi, the psycho, has announced new laws which would, quote, pursue sanctions against families of assailants, seal off an attacker's home in preparation for its immediate demolition, and cancel social security and health benefits for the families of attackers.
They've been doing that for 25, 30 years.
I know, but it's
another round of it. Throw up that one just from the archives, because this is something that I've stopped talking about or writing about because I did it for about 10 years and I was like, well, that's all I've got to say on that. 10 years of talking about it. This is from 2009. Let's go down to the first link there, or the second, like Hamas blame. Just keep going. Keep going, yeah. So that one right there. And then a few more. Hamas blames Israeli collaborators for launching attacks in October 2008. So Hamas have said about the rocket firing, I think those who are responsible are those who collaborate with Israel because there is consensus by all Palestinian groups to respect the truce. He's a senior leader of the Hamas movement. And then according to AFP, Zahar told a Gaza radio station that the party that fired the rockets was linked to Israel as it provided a pretext to exercise pressure on the Palestinian people. That's a very basic concept that is never addressed because it's like the core of traditional conspiracy theories, i.e. a false flag attack, but it's not allowed and has never been allowed to be talked about openly or even hinted at in the Western press because it's a conspiracy theory. It's a crazy conspiracy theory. The idea that a state like Israel would find it expedient or useful for its security policy and its control over the general the country and the conflict to carry out an attack or facilitate an attack by its enemy on Israeli citizens in order to justify further repressions, or like that guy said, basically it's a very logical, coherent strategy, military/political strategy that he's voicing there, which is that the rocket attacks were fired by people linked to Israel because they provide a pretext for Israel to put pressure on the Palestinian people. But apparently that simple concept, logical, checks out from a political policy point of view, has never been allowed to be talked about or given any credence or any airtime at all.
Yeah.
If you just go to the next one, because I'm just in this article, I was just detailing a few things. The next one was a BBC News report from 2008 that Yemen seizes an Israeli-linked cell. Yemeni President Salah had said the security force had arrested a group of alleged Islamist militants linked to Israeli intelligence. Now, those two things are meant to be the opposite, right? Islamist militants and Israeli intelligence, because Islamist militants are Hamas, Palestinians in general, they're Islamist and they're militant, and like you were just saying, Israel has a big problem with them and wants to kind of shut them down and cut them off and stop them from attacking Israel because they're evil, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish terrorists, basically, right? So there should never be any Islamist militants linked to Israeli intelligence. It's certainly not Islamist militants carrying out attacks against Jewish people or against Muslims who are linked to Israeli intelligence. And
yet the links are all over the place. At least they're reported like this here and there.
Yeah. And then another one. This from the Sydney Herald in 2002. Headline: Palestinians arrest Al Qaeda posers. So Palestinian security forces arrest a group of Palestinians, quote unquote Palestinians, for collaborating with Israel and posing as operatives of Osama bin Laden's Al Qaeda network. He said the alleged collaborators sought to discredit the Palestinian people, justify every Israeli crime, and provide reasons to carry out a new military aggression in the Gaza Strip. No. Never. That can never, ever, ever happen, Neil. Now, shut up.
Unless it's in Russia. It happens all the time there.
Right, of course. Now we're allowed to say that false flag attacks happen, but only Russia. And then the next one, again, 2006, Lebanon's army captures Israeli Mossad terrorist ring. Members of a terrorist network allegedly working for the Israeli Mossad, and that a suspect confessed to his role in assassinating Hezbollah and Palestinian officials. So an Islamic, Middle Eastern, based in Palestine, Lebanon, Islamic organization that is being run effectively by Israeli intelligence to take out Israeli intelligence's enemies in Hezbollah and in Palestine. Rafah was part of a terror network working for the Israeli Mossad, and its members took training courses in and outside Israel. And then the man himself, just scroll down to the next headline. Keep going, right there. Arafat himself, in 1995, said Israel was behind suicide bombings. So these were The Beit Lid massacre, in which 21 Israeli soldiers were killed by 2 Islamic Jihad suicide bombers, Palestinian Authority Chief Yasser Arafat told a group of visiting dignitaries that right-wing Israelis had collaborated with the killers. Otherwise, he said, the killers would not have passed through several army checkposts without being stopped.
That's why I mentioned their surveillance today. 25 years later, like the idea that there's someone they don't know in the West Bank, no. They know everyone. For me, the tell.
I suppose on that point, before you get on to it, go ahead.
I suppose people will come back to you and say, "Okay, he said, she said." It's hearsay. There's a little evidence, but it's in the end, it's what somebody has said. That's what they'll always say. Wow, we've no evidence for that. Yeah, he said so, but so what? But look at the plain fact of the second synagogue shooting this week.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 13-year-old. By definition, he has handlers, whoever they are, presumably Islamists, by definition. But they were at pains to say he was a lone wolf, did it alone, not connected with anyone.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
come on, the fuck, that's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
What? And I strongly suspect they're burying the connections that put that kid in that position, and he was shot dead immediately. By the way,
yeah, of course, because dead men tells them to. And again, this is if you just go back to that article, to the last one, I just wanted to reference because it speaks to what you're saying there. Just down to the next one right below that, and the bolded paragraph. So this is, and this is something that's no one disputes or has disputed, that there's a cadre of well-trained Arabic speaking Israeli informants. Right? No one disagrees that Israel, like any Israeli Shabak or Mossad, would have informants, right? The FBI does it all the time. It's not a secret even. It's accepted as normal practice for those kind of intel agencies. So the cadre of well-trained Arabic-speaking Israeli informants who are indistinguishable physically from the Palestinian population, Shabak has little problem gathering intelligence on a people whose every movement is regulated by hundreds of checkpoints and by total Israeli control of their borders. These infiltrators prey on Arab innate hospitality and friendliness. The Palestinians call them mustarabin, i.e. those who appear to be Arabs. Palestinians are not surprised when someone somewhere comes up to them and says, "Got you."
Yeah, got you.
So, that obviously that's
Israeli niggy sob.
Right. Well, you've got, you're talking there about Palestinians who have been turned informants, and for they're given a choice, and this is classic, right? The FBI does it as well. They're given a choice. They're criminals or they've been caught in something. And I mean, there was a mainstay of the conflict in Northern Ireland as well during the Troubles. Someone gets caught, either a criminal or part of the organization, like in the case of Palestine, a Palestinian militant or something, or even someone who isn't a militant.
No, like the 13-year-old was just
it's just
picked off the street,
caught and told that you have a choice. You work for us or you go to prison for 20 years. Most people are going to say, okay, what do you want me to do? And they basically tell you to go somewhere and be somewhere at a certain point in time, and you're going to be the fall guy for some kind of an operation that was planned involving many other people, or you can, in the case of Palestine, you can easily get those people because you've got a lot of leverage over them, i.e. they're going to prison if they don't do what you say. You can get them, or some of them will, if you convince them enough and give them enough assurances, they will go and carry out shooting attacks depending on the nature of the person. They'll go and shoot a bunch of Jews because they themselves are Palestinians. Maybe they're criminals. You get some of the worst
maybe
types.
They have motivation and they're
right.
They're angry.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's plenty.
It's extremely easy to do, and the only thing that the only counter argument to that being a reality would be that some kind of moral argument that no, they wouldn't do that. And people who make that argument are extremely naive because they don't understand how politics and the world works and the type of people in positions of power in these countries. They have no problem with creating a situation or creating a terror attack or carrying out a terror attack or killing civilians of their own population in order to further a political agenda. And so that's the split, really. It's either you live in La La Land where that can't possibly happen because I don't want it to be true. I don't want to live in a country or a world where that kind of thing happens, where politicians who I want to believe are good people looking out for my interests would ever do something as evil as that. So you live in that world and you deny all the evidence that that's not the world doesn't work like that, or you face into the fact that this is very often politically expedient. I mean, you can go to the FBI terror plots in the US. It's been talked about publicly, not necessarily in those terms, but all the details are there of the FBI. Most of the FBI's terror plots are the FBI arrests over the past 20 years of terrorists in America. And maybe you've forgotten about them because, you don't see it so much anymore because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. But for a long time, you were seeing almost every month, you were seeing some kind of an FBI revelation that the FBI had stopped a planned terror attack. And outlets like the Washington Post and Washington Times and others wrote articles in this basically saying that the vast majority of those so-called FBI terror plots or FBI prevention of terrorist attacks were actually created by the FBI themselves, where they took a bunch of people who were easily managed, easily manipulated, and kind of sheep-dipped them and put them in certain different situations and brought them along in the so-called terror plot. And then just before, when they thought they were going to carry out the terror plot, then or the terror attack, they arrested them and touted it as a great success in stopping it, when they had actually created it from the ground up. It would never have happened if they hadn't gone along and done it. And that's job justification. Because if the FBI is tasked with stopping terrorism, but there's no terrorism happening, well, you don't get your budget next year, right? So you have to cut staff and you lose all your perks.
They said as much explicitly, I remember.
Right. So the same applies in a similar way in Palestine, in Israel, and in other places around the world, where the controlling authorities had an agenda to justify their presence there. For example, especially in the case of an occupation by a foreign power, like the British occupation in Ireland, the Israeli occupation essentially of Palestine. They have to justify their continued occupation and continued control over the Palestinian people, and the only way they can do that is by there being a continual awareness or reality, let's say, of the Palestinians being a deadly threat to Israel. Now, if the Palestinians tend to go quiet for a long period of time, that starts to become a problem. How do we continue to justify our security state when there is nothing to secure against? Well, what about one of them informants?
Yeah, and it's just when Benjamin Netanyahu comes back,
right? The arch
with a cloud of corruption,
arch psycho himself.
He is. The guys are pugging. Now, I don't know if this is connected. You talked about the global war on terror past tense, but at the same time that the ship was kicking off in Israel, meanwhile, over in Western Europe, a machete attack in southern Spain. The timing's interesting, right? So some guy has a machete and he attacked a priest in one church, and it spilled over into a second church in Algeciras in southern Spain. And he killed some other dean or someone working in a second church right on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And the suspect is a Moroccan with no prior criminal record, either in Spain or in any other country. But he was a undocumented migrant. So he was, Moroccan. Okay, whatever. There's been a lot of those, and it doesn't take, at this point, it no longer, they're spontaneous. There was another one in Belgium last week, and there's graphic CCTV footage. You actually see it from start to finish. Two guys waiting at a train station, and one of them just reaches down, gets a knife out of a bag, and stabs someone in the neck. Anyway, that's, okay, I want to focus on this one, because on the same time that this happened in Spain, in Germany, 2 people were killed after a quote man stabs passengers on a train. There's an interesting detail in this one about this guy. When you open that up, do a word search for suspect. Okay, it's somewhere in the text. There, second paragraph. The suspect, described as a stateless Palestinian man, stabbed several people on board a train. That's, I don't know what that means, but that's interesting. I mean, I suppose there are Palestinian refugees in Europe, but nowhere near as much as like Syrians and from other Arabic countries.
Meanwhile, it had echoes of, I don't know what this actually means, but it just occurred to me as maybe significant. There was a fire in the UK, I think it's in London, St John's Wood, in area of London, St Mark. It's a heritage listed church was destroyed in a devastating fire. You can just see a picture of it down there below. Pretty much totally gutted. You know, it's this historic kind of heritage listed church, and you know, I don't know. It was only a couple of days ago, so, but you know, you'd have to wonder. I suppose that can happen, but it's very arson. You know, is
shit. There's been a church arson campaign in Canada. It's like that's a public debate. That's not a conspiracy theory anymore. Yeah. That was happening. Yeah. A coordinated conspiracy to burn churches.
And it's very likely that Notre Dame was
France as well. Some of them at least
set on fire. And you know, leaving aside religion or any beliefs or anything like that, these buildings are beautiful buildings, you know, painstakingly built, and they represent you know, better times, let's say, and a place where people can go, you know, for a bit of solitude or reflection or whatever, you know. And for them to be burned down, and especially if it, you know, if it ends up being some kind of an immigrant, the blame is pinned on, or some, you know, again, you didn't get into, you know, state involvement in those kind of things, you know what I mean, where people will be put up to burning down churches and stuff to inflame tensions, because obviously the whole immigration thing is still burning in the UK and in Europe as a general rule. And of course, American immigration is an issue. For some reason, it's been an issue for quite a long time. And it's a fracture point there where it could be easily stoked within society.
By deep state actors. Well, don't be afraid to suggest that, because remember, it's kosher now. This is Bloomberg speculating that Mr. Koran burner in Sweden is a Russian agent. So the hell, if it's fair game, then we can speculate that the CIA and MI6
some dude
and Mossad are doing similarly. This is obviously bullshit. So this is the spat over Turkey's reluctance for Sweden to become a member of NATO. So there's one Quran burning incident with this guy. I forget his name. Rasmus Paludan something. Then he does it again this week. In front of the Turkish embassy, something like that. I won't show a video of it, but the video there's a police cordon around him protecting him as he goes about it.
Burning the Quran.
Clearly, it's meant to be antagonistic to Turkey.
Yeah.
Now, Finland goes and sees that and goes, but that's not good. We cannot go alone. We need to go into this together with Sweden, right? No, we are too small. So Finland's like grappling for who's doing this. They have they're right. It's intentional. So they go, well, it must be Russia, because Russia wants to stop us, Finland, and Sweden from joining NATO.
So it wants to.
More likely, it's provocative Western intelligence. I think the clue might have been walrus-faced Bolton threatening to kick Turkey out of NATO. They see what's coming. It won't be that Sweden isn't allowed into NATO because Turkey vetoes it. They're going to overrule Turkey's veto, I suspect, and force them to say, are you with us or against us? I think it's Turkey that's leaving. There's a rumor this week in Turkey. Someone high official said, we've got about 6 months left in NATO.
We may leave.
It's coming.
He said, yeah.
Mayhem. Meanwhile, mayhem in Memphis. What in the hell happened here?
What?
Did you see that? The killing of a kid, Tyre Nichols.
Yeah. 5 cops. Racist cops. Again. It's all about the racist cops attacking black kids. Those white racist cops. Oh, hang on. All 5 of them are black. Yeah. Well, that's just, it exposes the nuanced nature of that debate of police brutality, which, you know, obviously is a problem, maybe getting worse because of just the general degradation of Western society and corruption and all sorts of from an authority from the top down into police forces.
Nuances indeed. This is how nuanced you have to be to understand it. This is a take from an expert in America. He reckons that anyone who says the killing of Tyre Nichols can't be about racism because the cops were also black really doesn't understand how white supremacy or anti-blackness work.
I mean, I think I understand how it works.
Look at that 4 million views.
I think I understand how it works. At least if my assumption of what he's saying is right, is that white supremacy and anti-blackness infects black cops as well. So they become self-hating
Oh, well,
blacks.
they said white supremacy is a mind virus.
Right. So it infects black people as well, to the point that they become racist towards black people.
Yeah.
And they start to see black people as prone to crime and violence, and therefore they have to be dealt with a more heavy hand. But it's got nothing to do with the black cops themselves. They're victims in a certain sense. Those cops should be let off because they're victims of white supremacy. They're victims of white supremacy. It's the white people who have negatively influenced the minds of those black cops to attack one of, quote unquote, their own. So the responsibility lies at the door of white people. So you should probably put 5 white cops in prison as proxies for those 5 black cops.
Right. That'll be justice.
And give them 5 statues.
Right.
A statue of them beating that poor guy outside Capitol Hill. Anyway, something like that. This is the kind of bullshit that the people come up with. I mean, people have lost
obviously
their minds,
but it did the issue,
It's
like
people
we were
bullshit.
hammering on before wokeness took over things. The US the cops are violent. They are freaking that's insane. That just doesn't happen in another country. Outside the US, you don't get your head kicked in until you're dead in general.
You don't get shot.
No matter what he'd done, they had him under control. I don't know what was he wanted for. I didn't even look at it yet.
Not much.
Whatever he's wanted for, they have him. There's no need to beat the shit out of him at that point. So there's a police problem, 100%. There's there's something brutal about the US, though. Isn't it interesting also, this is Memphis. This is Memphis, Tennessee, where all the shit kicked off with segregationism in the 1950s in the US. I mean, there are many stories of 5 white cop beating the shit out of someone black. And it applied then. It's understandable where anti-racism emerged from because of the optics of what was going on back then. But now we're in Memphis 70 years later. It's still the same, but the faces have changed. What does that tell you?
So was it ever a race problem?
Right. Is the violence coming from something else?
Well, it's just violence, violent tendencies, aggressive, violent tendencies amongst any people of any race, creed, or color.
So there's some rioting is coming out of that. People are burning a bit. Antifa's call for war. Burn it all down.
Yeah.
Cop cars being burned in LA. And
not as much as there could have been if there were white cops. But
no, absolutely. This isn't the George Floyd moment, but
no.
Related story, same story.
Go on, related.
Well, there were 3 mass shootings in California last week. One happened actually prior to our show. We just didn't get time to mention it. Let's have a look at this one first. Monterey, California. Monterey. How do you pronounce it? Monterey. 11 dead in mass shooting at Chinese New Year street celebration. People saw that, I'm sure. Okay. No, that report probably doesn't have the perpetrator. No, they do. Authorities identify, this is a follow-up report, a 72-year-old man. Then there was another mass shooting nearby. Well, nearby in relative terms, about 100 miles away. Let me see. Am I reading? I've got some text in front of me. I'm not sure if it's this article. Can you do a word search for dissent?
No.
It's not here. Okay, but anyway, I can't remember. I think this is an AP write-up. Okay, so that was the first one. And then nearby, Half Moon Bay. This happened Monday, so after we last talked. Residents of 2 separate communities now, the first one in Monterey and Half Moon Bay, are reeling after 2 mass shootings in 3 days, which claimed 18 people's lives and injured 10 more. Okay. 18 together in those 2. Both alleged shooters were men of Asian descent over the age of 60. We saw that one of the first one was 72. There's no whitey going postal thing here. Both are Asian themselves. I presume that means East Asian, like Chinese or from Indochina. over the age of 60. That's odd. Here's another odd stat. Police said the victims of the second of those shootings, Half Moon Bay, were both Asian and Hispanic farm workers. Okay. The reason I mentioned that second detail is because then 4 days ago, this happened. California in mourning again after a third mass shooting in 8 days. Okay, so this time surely it was Whitey. No. An agricultural worker, remember the farm workers in the second one? An agricultural worker killed 7 people at the farm where he worked.
Officers arrested a suspect in Monday's shooting, 67-year-old Chun Li Zhao.
What the hell's going on there? 72, 60-some, and 67. All Asian. That's fucking bizarre. I'm not saying they're necessarily connected. This could be like one of those reality quirks, like something's just setting certain people off, like, and off they go. Bonkers.
Yeah.
But the fact that there are farm working connections, maybe it does it's a bit more than a quirk.
They're all working on cannabis farms. They're all smoking the weed, and the weed's making them violent.
No, weed makes you peaceful and loving.
It does.
Yeah, peace, man. Actually, that's bullshit. You're right. The statistics studies show that it's the opposite, which is perfect because they want everyone smoking weed these days. What to pass? Well, it pacifies, but it also
for a while until it builds up.
Okay,
it suppresses your emotions until they build up and explode in some kind of a postal situation. I have to go back to Bill Gates. I'm sorry.
No, Jesus.
He does. You can't see his moves in this one, so it's all right.
Okay.
Don't worry. I know the moves traumatize you, but here he is, just on a quick.
What's that supposed to mean?
His moves.
Go on.
I know, but Bill Gates' moves traumatize everybody. Okay. They're not alone in it. Like, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's horrific. You know, that man gives health advice to people. Here is the reptilian. I mean.
He's America's doctor.
Yeah, here he is. He's telling you about the COVID vaccines. You know, COVID vaccines that he told everybody to get and how awesome they were a year or two ago.
The thing, yeah.
The things that he told everybody to get and how, yeah, here he is. Quick update.
Current vaccines are not infection blocking.
Okay.
They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people.
Okay.
And every one of those things is fixable. In fact, doing that work is going to help vaccinology very, very broadly.
So you mean like doing that work in terms of like testing these dodgy thingies on people and finding out that they didn't actually work and maybe causing certain side effects that, you know, maybe possibly have led to the large increase in excess mortality across the world, really, at this point, as shown by government statistics, that nobody has an explanation for. But that's all good because that'll help us to make better thingies later.
When we'll save lives.
When we will eventually come good on our promise to eventually save some lives. But in the meantime, people are going to die. Whatever. Twitter files dropped. Last thing I have is Twitter files dropped a couple of days ago. Pretty interesting, actually, not very long. Matt Taibbi, go and check it out on Twitter. Number 15. Twitter files number 15. Basically, yeah, if you didn't know already, hard evidence that the whole Russian collusion, interfering in our election, Russian bots, all that kind of stuff, absolutely 100% false. There was a group called something 68. What was it called? Hamilton 68.
Oh, yeah.
This kind of website and group who were exposing.
Atlantic Council.
They were basically going. They were basically Atlantic Council. Yeah, they were basically going around looking at any website, any Twitter account, or any person anywhere, but often on social media and Twitter, who said anything that did not fit with anything pro-Trump, anything even middling, anything centrist, anything that didn't fully agree with the Russian collusion, Russian stealing our election narrative, and flagging them to Twitter, trying to get Twitter to ban them, and producing, the main thing they produced, Hamilton 68, by doing this, was writing, providing large amount of false, dubious, crap, bullshit information, labeling obviously American or Western based individual Twitter account holders who are just saying the wrong thing as Russian bots, and then producing like vast amounts of media stories on it that the media then took up and propagated
to cause pressure back on Twitter execs and staff.
Yeah, and
to do something about it.
But even Twitter execs go on hang like in the third tweet in the last Twitter files release. He says, "There's an email that's quoted from and screenshot of the email inside Twitter." Saying that these people falsely accuses a bunch of legitimate right-leaning accounts of being Russian bots. Virtually any conclusion drawn from it will take conversations in conservative circles on Twitter and accuse them of being Russian. These are quotes by Twitter executives about Hamilton 68 saying that these people are, to a certain extent, to old Twitter's credit, they had a limit to the kind of bullshit and patently false allegations that were being made about content on their platform by these basically Washington establishment think tank bullshit artists who are driving the whole Russia collusion thing, which was, we can say at this point, was 100% false. And we said it at the time, and then with any sense said it at the time, but there's a lot of people who didn't believe it and believed the Russian collusion thing. But that Russia collusion thing, whether you know it or not, whether you're willing to accept it or not, was 100% false. There was no substance to it whatsoever. Now, try and remember just how much media space it took at the time, how much of the information sphere it dominated at the time, and it was 100%. Exactly, and it was 100% false. All of it was false. So it should serve people, if you can get your head around it and accept it, and kill that sacred cow. It should serve you for future or for when you're looking at anything going on in the media and the news today. That there's massive vested interests and agendas going on all the time that very often involve complete 100% fabricated lies that are pushed out there as truth and carried by reputable media outlets who then don't retract it afterward, don't say sorry afterward.
Yeah,
they just go, yeah, that was just, anyway. What's going on? What about that Putin?
It must be true. There's Wikipedia pages on it now. Well, if they're really smart, they'll go one step further and they'll think, so everything we said or believe in on any of the issues that they said or Russian disinformation, they've ideologically linked with the kinds of things Russia says. Therefore, Russia's telling the truth about a whole spread of things.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
Yeah.
That means the West is run by an empire of lies.
Empire of lies. And also,
so Putin's right.
Basically. Yeah, and they're the West, the US and UK in particular, are much closer to North Korea in terms of their attitude towards information and their lockdowns and clampdowns and restrictions on information, what people can and can't talk about and think. They're much closer to North Korea than they are to South Korea, for example.
And that might be harsh on North Korea.
It might be as well, yeah. But in terms of how they depict North Korea, they're much closer to it.
Indeed.
Like, for example, this is
Mirage of it.
The last one here is it's a Big Brother watch, UK. They have uncovered some documents about Whitehall, which is the seat of the British government.
Service.
Inside Whitehall's Ministry of Truth, there were secretive anti-information teams that conducted mass domestic political monitoring. The key findings are anti-fake news units in the Cabinet Office spent much of their time monitoring social media for political dissent under the guise of counter-disinformation work.
Mm-hmm.
Labour leader Keir Starmer and Conservative MPs
David Davis
and
Peter Hitchens.
Peter Hitchens, Julia Hartley-Brewer, who's a
radio host.
Yeah. They all came under scrutiny and had files kept on them. Soldiers from the Army's 77th Brigade, which we've talked about before, collated tweets from British citizens about COVID-19 at the start of the pandemic and passed them to the Cabinet Office. Troops also conducted sentiment analysis about the government's COVID-19 response. The Rapid Response Unit pressured Whitehall Department to attack newspapers for publishing articles analysing COVID-19 modelling that it feared would affect compliance with pandemic restrictions, etc., etc., etc.
And these people sleep comfortably at night.
And these people, Yeah, the Brits were doing the same. It says the Counter-Disinformation Unit had a special relationship with social media companies that it used to recommend content to be removed. So doing exactly the same thing as the US was, the Washington establishment was doing, as revealed in the Twitter files that we were just talking about. The Brits were doing exactly the same thing. And despite the fact that everything that people were saying back then,
you're fascists, you lot.
Yeah, the only thing that didn't happen, they were just drawing up, and of course they were having an impact. They were drawing up all this, or they were collating all of this evidence of, dissenters amongst the population on social media, and they didn't arrest them. I mean, they're one step from. They didn't go as far as putting them in the gulag or putting them in prison for their wrongthink, but they definitely used all that information that they saw as people telling the truth. Basically, they didn't like that the people were telling the truth about a certain situation, about lockdowns, or etc. So they, used that information, gauged the kind of public sentiment, saw who was maybe gaining some popularity in a certain perspective, like being anti-lockdown and showing, evidence why it was a bad idea, why it was totalitarian, tyrannical. And they used that then to kind of like influence the media, which they obviously have a big influence over the media, to kind of discredit those people via the media. Calling them anti-lockdown, anti-vax, whatever, crackpot.
Part of a death cult. That was a big spread of a campaign.
Crackpot theorists and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's not putting you in prison but it's negating the ability for the average person to, and groups of people and influential people, from having a voice that can reach their fellow citizens, telling them the truth about what government is doing and how and that government is doing things that are nefarious and that are bad for the population. Anybody who tries to say that gets shut down, basically. Has their voice shut down.
Which has an effect on their income.
Right.
They cannot, if you can't sustain a living doing it, then you have to do something else.
Right.
That's the idea. Economically, it's sanctions, to use the term Bibi said about imposing on Palestinians. It's interesting that he used that term as well, because I've seen it pop up in COVID response measures as well. So how do we sanction people?
Yeah.
Sanctioning Russia, sanctioning dissidents. Again, the same language used against both. They want to make sure you don't have
a voice.
You have to do something else. You've got to either say other things or go get a job.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to be working against us so flagrantly.
Yeah. We have the microphone and you shut up. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got. You got anything else?
No, just what the hell? New Zealand flooding.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah. Some nice flooding in North Island.
Has it stopped now? I just heard it was raining and raining and raining and raining.
Yeah, we got some bodacious flooding, so cool. Like to see a bit of flooding.
That's it, really. Yeah. There was an asteroid near miss.
No, it wasn't. You don't want to say, but did anybody even pay attention to that?
I did. I opened my phone and the headline was like, asteroid to hit Earth Friday. I thought, shit, that's pretty in your face. And then you read, oh, right, it's going to be a near miss.
Yeah.
What's with the headline?
It was the fourth closest pass. It was about 3 to 8 meters, so about 10 to 20 feet or whatever, 10 to 25 feet wide. Little space rock coming pretty close, supposedly within a few thousand kilometers, a few thousand miles, a couple of thousand miles of the surface of the Earth. And they say, but don't worry, even if it were to actually impact, to be on a course with the surface of the Earth, it would just burn up as a kind of fairly flashy kind of fireball. So no big deal. And I'm like, does nobody know about all of the sightings over the stark increase in the number of sightings of those kind of big, and I'm not talking about shooting stars here, I'm talking about like fireballs flying through, the relatively low
for at least several seconds
atmosphere, for several seconds and breaking up into a string, a stream. There's videos all over social media and on websites, and there's a meteorite kind of sightings network that you can look at graphs that show that there's been an increase
AMS data,
over the AMS over the past 10-15 years, and it's not to do with the preponderance of the number of cell phones or people recording it, because that hasn't really changed in the places where these are being seen, but they're seen all over the world. And so they said, don't worry, it would just burn up, this thing that was all the news kind of thing for a day or two there. Don't worry, it'll just burn up if it were to be on a course with the planet. But it's like, and they're saying it's okay, that's not going to happen, yet that is happening. and has been happening on an increasing scale almost every week, or some at the very least once a month. Some major fireball like that is recorded, and they say nothing about those. So it's like, you don't have a story here. You're showing us this little space rock with many of its brothers and sisters actually flying into our atmosphere, and some of them actually hitting the ground and being found repeatedly for years now. And you want to talk about that one that's not going to give us that display while all these other ones do? What?
I think they were bigging up the fact that they had spotted it beforehand.
Yeah.
Look,
but
they're
that's even
conveying
worse.
the message between the lines. We've got complete control over what's coming and going. No,
Except
you
that's
don't.
even worse. Like I've been saying, there's all these ones coming in that are doing more than that one that you're talking about does, i.e. they actually enter the atmosphere and burn up. And but because you don't notice them, because it's only people with cell phone cameras who are out at night spot them, because you have no clue they're happening, you don't talk about them. Only talk about the one that you found that isn't actually going to put on any kind of display. I'm like, get out of here, like douchebags. Anyway, yeah, that's all I got.
Okay.
And that's all we got, I think. So yeah, we are going to leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for listening, watching, commenting. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. We'll be back next week with another show. So until then, have a good week. See you later. Bye.
See you next week. Bye, everyone.
Can't stop the signal, Mel.